Hey guys, welcome. There was some incentive to try AMS2 again. I think they did another most recent patch, always severe updates to the game, so maybe time to try this again. And also there was new DLC, so I got hold of the USA Part 2 or whatever. Most importantly though, first, why I never touched this game is because setting up the controls is, for whatever reason, not simple. I'll not walk you through the whole process, but just explain you my struggles, to say the least. So, if you have, like me, 3 different USB controllers to get the game to, well, play the game, right? So I have the wheelbase, I have the rim, and I have the pedals, all different USB devices. I needed to restart the game 3 times because on every restart the game will only be able to calibrate a single USB device. So I started with the steering wheel going left right, so calibrating the base. Then I had that set up, but it wouldn't recognize the pedals or the buttons. So I restarted the game, went back to the menu, and then I was able to do the throttle and brake pedal from the second USB device. Then I restarted again, and then I was able to click the buttons and the game to recognize the buttons on the steering wheel. You see where I'm going, the user interface is... I mean, the user interface probably is even fine, but the game not recognizing your controller is a major pain in, well, the ass, to be honest. The other thing is then, say you fiddle with your force feedback settings or whatever, right? And you screwed it. Then you go back to reset to defaults, which means it resets everything, including the buttons. So you're not being able to just reset the force feedback, for example. And I can tell the force feedback of that game is as fiddly as it gets. There is now a default plus preset, which does certain things that I'm not aware of, and I couldn't find it. Then there's a default, which does something, and then there's a custom, which loads a custom text file, actually, that you can get from their forums. And there are, I think, 900 lines of code somehow affecting the force feedback in that game. It's messy. Okay, you can load that. Maybe it works for whatever reason on your wheel, maybe that doesn't work on another. But what strikes me is that everybody playing this game will necessarily have a different feeling of what the force feedback in this game actually is. And I tried the custom file, I tried the default, I tried the default plus, and I got 3 completely different games. And I think if you want people to be able to get somewhat of a similar experience across different PCs, hardware, and whatnot, this needs to be way better. I don't have a perfect solution, but I'm thinking there's a right way to display force feedback, and this game just offers way too many options to first and foremost screw it up. Of course you can make it better, but to get to a point where it's actually good was majorly difficult. Then back to the UI. You can already see when I cycle through the different points up here, default plus, default custom, the values underneath don't change. But the different profiles use those sliders in a different way. For example, in the custom profile, the damping slider does not act as a damping slider, but instead it acts as a power steering slider, which changes its entire functionality. Okay, so which means if I just want to switch between profiles, and then I have to change the sliders below that to make this profile work, I can't just go to a different profile because the sliders will be wrong. Ugh. Okay. That was part of the pain. The other part of the pain is, and I won't do this now, if you go to the performance section, if you do any graphical changes here, for example, the anti-aliasing, which I have here, it requires you to restart the game. I don't know why. Okay. But in the end, how I got somewhat of a good feeling with the force feedback that I can kind of agree to, and having a car that behaves in a predictable way, and there's information in the force feedback telling me what the car is doing and what the car requires me to do as a driver. I found on the direct drive of the VRS base, because I have no clue how it will act on another hardware, the default plus for me was the best so far. I figured gain at 40 is somewhat okay. The low force boost, I don't really know if I'll notice that. Turning the FX down, which, yeah, something like road surface, curbs. I don't really know where the game draws the line between what gain is and what effects is, and some sort of damping, because otherwise the game would immediately kill me on the straight if I just let go of the wheel a tiny bit. So we have major oscillation on the straight if I don't go very high on the damping, for example. Another bit that stroked me, whatever, is that the gain slider does not act as the main force feedback strength slider in the game as you would, for example, know this from ACC. So in ACC, if you take the gain slider to 10%, the highest force feedback effect you can get is like 10% of whatever your wheelbase is set to. Here, this is not the case. You can have gain on 1 or 0 and turn FX up, and then you'd be lost for whatever the gain controlled for the main force feedback on going on the straight or whatever, the basic resistance, if you will. But the effects will be 100% still, whatever you have on the effect slider. So the gain slider does not moderate the effect slider. That's very important, because if you are here with a direct drive and you're expecting the gain slider to control the effects in total, and you put it low and then you feel safe, okay, let's see how the force feedback works, and then you end up on a curb with high effects value, it's going to break your hands outright. And I was really close to that. So make sure effects is low to begin with when you're on the direct drive to not need to go to hospital. Okay, lots of grain of salt there, or outright salt. Anyway, then what I got was the USA second part package or whatever to get the IndyCars, and I already did a few laps, so let's get finally away with a menu and onto the driving. Actually, no, there's more. Camera. So I'm on the ultra wide, recording a lot of pixels right here, just to give you the feeling that I actually have while driving this. So, and then I'm using like 91 field of view, and we'll quickly go to the cockpit if we had decent loading times. Don't tap out while loading, because it will stop. And then you tap back into the game and you'll find the loading slider not having done anything, because the game just parks in your RAM when you're tapped out of the game. Anyway, before we actually get to drive, we do this, but we then go back to the menu to go back to the camera settings, leave the field of view as it is. The movement, there is something they call use legacy head movement. Okay, they explain this a bit here, over the head movement thingy. For me personally, I do not like the car moving around my eyes, right? As I'm strapped into the seat as tight as possibly, my eyes will naturally move with the car, and my eyes have to adapt to all the shakiness of whatever. So this is what I want the game to do, and this also gets rid of all the sponginess that you can feel the car having around you. So that was a much more direct feeling now than visually the game responding when I do something on the wheel, something on the pedal. So this was really important for me to take the legacy head movement, where it's actually the camera is locked to the car, fixed entirely. And then I use the head movement as a tiny bit of a filter to maybe not have it as extreme, but it's still connected to one another. And then everything else, literally everything else, needs to be off. I don't want any extra G-force or whatever. And this really cured my nausea that I always got with this game up until now. Then, because the field of view can be a bit off, let's just go to... Can I actually turn this off? Yeah, that we enjoy some silence here. I defined a lot of buttons to change the seat, the angle. So what you'll see here then now is I'm adjusting the angle the camera is doing. And it doesn't give me any feedback other than where it's pointing. Then here, for example, if I move the seat up and down to get a bit of a better view out of the cockpit, let's assume I'm a tall guy and I actually want to see something, you get a value at the bottom there, right? How far the seat is moved up. And the same is for if you... wrong button, actually. Where is it? If you move the camera to the front and the rear, so you have a reference, right? And you know, okay, my position is minus 0.2 and plus 0.05 or whatever, but you don't get the same thing for the field of view slider here. You don't get any reference where it's set now. And you also don't get it for the angle that you're set to, so you'd have to go back to the menu, go for the camera, and see where you've set your field of view, and suddenly I'm on 94 and I had no clue. So back to the 91 that I had previously. Resume to the cockpit, now you see it clicked into place. Anyway, let's get driving. I actually wonder if we should first, sorry, not here. We want to go to the pit box. We want to edit the setup. We really want to add this, change the setup. So we go to advanced. I think if we start with defaults, I haven't really done much. The main thing, and this is really something that I like about other games in ACC, that you have much more control over the differential. You have much more control over how the car actually feels going into different situations. So the only thing I really changed here from the stock setup was change the coast ramp angle for the differential to lock a little more easy, increase the clutch plates to have a bit more locking effect, and increase the preload to have an additional locking effect. And the car initially had a huge issue with the rear just getting all slidey on corner entries, and just forcing the diff to lock the rear tires a little more together helped loads in getting a much more predictable car. The only other thing then was, I think, a tiny bit of a brake bias change, and we'll leave it at that for now. I think I didn't do anything other than that. So let's see if I can talk and drive a IndyCar at the same time. We have a pit limiter. It's nice, it works in all gears. Sound variety there as well, pretty neat. And it doesn't just turn off when you leave the pit, you actually have to press the button and go. And what I achieved now with the force feedback is, I think it still feels on the straight. I think it feels a bit light, but this is to get rid of some, well, very much overpronounced other effects. So there seems to be a bit of a compromise. But I think more or less now I have everything that I need to know what the car is doing, and actually, focus a bit on driving. And the good thing is also now the force feedback is really quick. And for example, when I was using the custom profile that is recommended on the forum, really, there the wheel was like, it felt like an electronic steering in a modern car that isn't actually connected to the front tires. So it did have resistance, but it felt extremely damped and not really connected to the car. Everything was delayed. The oversteer effect wasn't as large as the oversteer that the car was experiencing. And that really gave me, a rather weird feeling at best. I think now it's mostly fine. There's still a bit of a vague space on corner exits, especially with a tiny bit of oversteer happening. But I think more or less you can, at this point at least, I would feel like, okay, I'm happy at least for this car. Haven't tried anything else so far, really. But this is a force feedback that I can live with. This is why I don't have to complain anymore. I think everything that I need is more or less there. I could maybe have a bit more detail there over the sausage, for example, which would mean having to change the effect slider, but oversteer is also part of the effect, and yeah. I would start to go, I would need to start going into the text file, controlling all the different force feedback settings, and as I said, there's 900 lines, and before I can possibly understand all this, I've probably done a PhD in vehicle science. So this is not gonna happen. I just want to play the game, and I'm trying to deal with as little options as possible to get a decent feeling from the game. And I think at this stage here, I'm almost happy. So now let's try to get some driving done. get done with the short shift early here, so I don't have to make it in the transition. Make it harder for the car. I don't know much about in this game about tire temperatures, where they should be. I just assume green is good. And I don't know about the tires pressures, where they should be, if this is another game of where lowest is best. That was late. What is quite nice is that you can move the UI about now. So I was able to move the tire graphics nearer to the center of the screen, was able to move the digital HUD there a bit closer. And now you also have the pedal bars bottom right there under the speed. So the throttle pedal, every time I shift up, short blip. And then you can also see how hard I'm pressing the brakes down there. I think that's okay. I also don't know how the wear affects the tire, if there's a quality layout or whatever. But in general, I was able to feel like within 2-3 laps or so, the tire was definitely already losing grip potential. And I couldn't really improve my lap times, even though I was still starting to drive better, at least I would say. So tire drop-off seems to be quite large. Be reminded, this car has 900 brake horsepower, ridiculous amount of torque. So it being quite slidey on corner exit is normal. Plus the downforce really takes some speed to actually come into play. Oopsie. I think I have damage off. And what's really great is the dependency of how much brake you can apply based on the speed you're going, so based on how much downforce there's actually acting on the car. And of course, the faster you go, the harder you can brake initially, but then have to decrease the brake and trail brake really gently in the end, because very low inputs on the brake will already lock up the tire. So I think in the end, the driving experience and how it feels as a driver, how much control you have over the car, and how your different inputs actually make for different car behavior, that is great. Like, it feels rewarding when you get it right, because it really takes a couple early on to not lock up the tire every time you go into a hairpin. So trailing through all the range of the available grip level of the front tire. So I think physics-wise, the game is probably right. I still feel there's too much tire wall available to go into the tire, so you can just keep pushing more and more into the tire, and it seems like there's always more grip available. And one other thing also is a bit, I can just turn and then I turn more and the car just rotates more, and it's a very weird way of the car starting to, or the car just having endless grip on the front but not on the rear. So I'm always kind of underdriving the front axle to not lose the rear, and probably would have to go a lot deeper in how the setups in this game work to maybe be able to change this, but just feels a bit unnatural at first that you can just always turn more to bring the car into a spin, essentially. But now let's just quickly go back to the pit box and change the force feedback profile, okay? I'll go, I mean, this is always very difficult to send the whatever I'm feeling across in the video. So I've loaded the custom file now by just switching to custom. It loads whatever file I have in a folder, and leave everything else untouched because I'm happy I found those, so I'm not touching them again, which means the damping is now the power steering slider, and everything will be extremely different. You can already see the game, the wheel does go back to center, but it feels really slow in doing so, especially the last bit of going to the center. Just yeah, takes a long time or actually never happens. Also on higher speeds. Well, it catches itself better there. Good thing is, it's not trying to kill me on the straights anymore. This is what the other profile would do. But I now also feel like I'm driving... It's completely numb. There's just like mixing a dough. There is no curb feeling anymore. This is... I mean, normally you can hear my wheel vibrating and the whole room is shaking. But this is all now gone, and I just feel like this is a wheel that has a high friction value. And there's really no fidelity anymore. There's some resistance here on the straight, yes, fine. But there's no curb. No curb here either. There is a bit of indication of the oversteer, but it just happens too late. So if I start to accelerate out of this corner, there's also no feeling for the front tire. Everything feels... The steering feels slow now, even though nothing in that regard really has changed, and it's like a pretty elastic dough to me right now. It's still drivable somewhat because the resistance itself helps to not do too much steering and still be somewhat careful. But in the end, it feels like driving a 1990 steering wheel right now without any actual force feedback, just a rubber band on the inside doing its thing. And it really lost its thing. So yeah, this is odd. Let me just quickly try to get rid of the power steering. Let's remember 30. So damping is now power steering. Let's just reduce that to maybe 5. I don't want to die. Let's see if that makes for a change. Yeah, the dough is a bit less now, which does make sense. The curb is still not there. Still no feeling what the front tires are actually doing, how much load I'm asking. There's just a basic resistance that changes a bit with speed, but it doesn't really change with what's happening to the car. And everything is extremely muted right now, so I assume this whatever custom thing someone has built there, and there's 230 pages on the forum on it. It just doesn't work on the direct drive for me, okay? Let's go back to the default, not default plus, to have the third way of experience force feedback here. And good thing is works on the fly, but the other thing you can notice is now the oscillation is extreme, even though with the banking the damping back on. Why? Really? Absolutely ridiculous. And then the other issue is now the steering initially is really light around the center. And only, I don't know, with half a second delay or so, I'm starting to get resistance, and it gets this rubber band effect, so to say. You have to grab it tight. There's the detail of the curbs is there, the car jumping, this is there. But it feels like some effects are too small, some are too big. And the bad thing being the big ones seem too small now, the small ones seem too big, and I don't really have... It feels like I'll be surprised any second of the car doing something that I didn't expect at all. I think generally there's information. Yeah, but this I totally didn't see this coming, the rear end there stepping out on the upshift. I'm mainly driving the car visually right now. And then I think I just want to go back to my initial default plus, whatever it does different. It's not documented, or at least I didn't find it easily. And there just could be, I mean, they do have tooltips and other things here. Well, not at all in the controls, which is the most important one, but you saw it in the head shake thingy, for example, right? But here's space, here's plenty of space. Use it. Give us some ideas what the force feedback is actually doing, and that would help a lot in not being held up for hours in the menu trying to get from the game what it apparently can do. It's just not available to the user. So back to the normal force feedback. I still have the shakiness on the straight. This is something that persists, and I can't really tune out without going into the text file. But this is the force feedback, at least, that feels the most natural to me and that I'm happy driving this, and as long as the car is going perfectly straight, I also don't have an issue with the oscillation. It really only becomes an issue once there's a lateral force acting on the front tires. So this is all fine here. It catches itself again as long as I'm not doing anything. But as soon as I'm giving it that impulse here, it starts shaking immediately and tries to kill me. But other than that, driving, I think this way is fine. You get the oversteer in time, quick enough without being too harsh so it doesn't break your wrists. And you also, should the sound indication of the front tire locking not be enough, this is also present on the wheel a bit, so the car starts pulling to the side where the tire locks up a bit, giving you a good indication of when the front tire is about to lock up, which makes it very easy for you to model or modulate the brakes in a way that you're always somewhat on top of the grip level of the tire there. There you go. There was a bit in the wheel. This was also very controlled. You see, I can drive the car, okay? I'm on top of it without spending many hours on the game, so I think this is all good now. The only sad thing about this really is that it is a huge amount of effort to get to this point. And I think that's the point of the video. If you make a game, don't make it as hard as getting into a real-life cockpit. And with that, I thank you all for joining, and we'll see you very soon.